Welcome back after 2 days of not having a video. It was the holiday of Purim and Shushan Purim, commemorating when the Jews were allowed to fight back haters who wanted to wipe them out and destroy them by virtue of a female heroine who became a queen. She was chosen, kind of forced, and used her power for good to prevent the extermination of a group of people, her people, the Jews. And so we do a lot of things. We give charity, we share food with our friends or loved ones, we eat a feast, we drink some wine, and we hear the Megillah, the story written out on a parchment. Can take anywhere from like approximately 20-30 minutes. Someone can read it very slow, it could take longer. Some people are experts, they power speed through it. It could be less than, it could be like 18 minutes even. Someone said their personal record was 15 minutes, whatever. So today I'm going to share a few things about serving. And in terms of serving and compartmentalizing, so the aspects of the self, we have lots of versions of ourselves, and there's one that is always needing to serve. It's a servant. Some people say the mind is a servant. Some people say the body is a servant. The heart is a servant. So what are some ways we could practice serving? I wrote this a couple years ago, but I'm still working on it. And so first of all, because someone asked or someone needs, we could serve them out of love or because, of the desire for their well-being. Often in serving, we cannot be attached to the outcome. We're also not assuming to be fully capable of every part without getting their instructions. Sometimes we have to say, how can I help you? How can I serve you? And we do need to have limits intact. We don't give someone else's portion to them. We don't give aspects of ourselves that we will not be able to replenish. For example, you wouldn't necessarily either, because someone else is suffering and their finger's cut off, you may not need to cut off your own finger just so that they feel less lonely about it. We have to have limits. When we practice being before the other person's eyes and ears and hands, we can practice being their eyes and ears and hands and do according to their will on their behalf, the way they would want it. Like if we're feeding someone, we can feed them the food that they want. If we are putting their clothes on them, we could put the clothes that they want to wear. And even if we're, entertaining someone, we could choose the things that they like. When we pass the buck, it means it'll come to me in a different part of my life. We can't escape the truth of our portion. What we're supposed to give is what we're supposed to get, is what we're supposed to give, and what we're supposed to get is what we're supposed to get. Sometimes it would have been better to vomit it up than to process it and become tainted by it. And this idea of when you think of alcohol poisoning, the body throws up. Is it better to swallow all that? No, it's sometimes not our portion, and we are instinctively, reflexively swallowing it up. But then we regurgitating it, and then sometimes we swallow it back. But we're not supposed to keep it in and be tainted, and then it poisons us from the inside. When we're willing to take breaks, and even give up, sometimes we can be of greater service to the whole, to ourselves, to collective. When the body is serving us, when the mind is serving us, when we're serving someone else. Because if someone's exhausted and they can't hold it up and they're so tired they're holding it lower, it's time to take a break, because if it needs to be held at that place, then you're not even doing it anymore. So better take a break or give up, and then the next person in line can do a better job. Sometimes. We can also allow cosmic directionally pass through least resistance. What that means, least resistance, is where there's the easiest flow. It's not like upstream instead or downstream. Like when going downstream, you're going with the stream. Upstream is going against the stream, right? So when we allow cosmic directionality to pass through, we end up in the least resistance flow, the natural flow of conservation of energy. And that's also as part of our system, because that being said, sometimes we have to break the internal laziness for the sake of releasing energy that's been absorbed, but not really part of the appropriate portion. So sometimes there's you have to break open the skin. You have to cut the food in order, or chew it, right? Versus just sipping soup. It's already easy, right? So we think of this, sometimes we have energy that we have to break it, You have to cut it, peel it, whatever. Like you get the example of food, and then we could release the energy because it's not the appropriate portion to just swallow it whole or, to eat the whole thing. Sometimes the skins we don't want to eat. So versus, removing the skin could be a whole thing, but better. So sometimes we even have that. So that internal blockage of getting that energy for, freely flowing could sometimes be going a little upstream. We have to use a little bit of energy against the current in order to then get the appropriate portion. And finally, I want to share that when we're serving, it's about letting others interpret our intentions if the way that they want to, via the meaning of my actions that they observe. And even while I communicate the best that I can, letting them have their interpretations and understanding of the situation. And the second topic for today is compartmentalizing. So when we're in survival mode versus the nervous system really can have tactics that are for different things. When everything is pushed into a little package to control us, it's only one tactic. So the indicator of survival mode is that we're trying one thing over and over. And it's Einstein who said, a sign of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. So for example, if when you're walking and someone screams, you might look. When someone taps you, you might, look. You might turn around. When someone's offering you some food, you might nod or look away to think about it. We have slightly different ways of acknowledging with just our head, and then let alone many, 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 many other ways of interacting. Now, when we have one thing where we're just going, every time, that's an indicator we're having that one reaction every time, whether someone's offering us food, tapping us, shouting our name or whatever, that's the indicator. So, sometimes doctors need the body to be divided up into parts to make it easier to solve, but that's not what the body needs. For example, we would say, the nervous system, the reproductive system, the endocrine system. I actually was studying in college for 7 years and continued a lot in being an apprentice, studying, but I left the academic field because I felt the spirit and the soul is reflecting the same pattern systems as the biological processes. It's like a spiritual anatomy, a spiritual physiology, or energetic, whatever. And even specific sins of others are our transgressions too. We can all return to love. So when the body is traumatized or violated, we then now use those ideas for psychological, trauma and violations, woundedness. We're all lovable though. We're a whole body. There's no need to pass the buck or to be okay with someone else's suffering. And this is obviously we're not talking about causing someone else suffering. We're saying just ignoring, whatever, letting people suffer, even when they're suffering because let's say they can't walk and they're trying to get something and you could just move it over 5 inches, but instead you're whatever, you can't relate. But that's just a stupid, simplified example. But obviously this happens all the time in life. We could just close the gap with someone and what they need, very small. And instead of requiring them to hide their toxicity and they're burying it and mixing it to dilute it with other toxins. In other words, when we're in the process of trying to avoid impurities, people don't need to pretend to be healthier or more better than they are. There's often a shyness, is afraid to move because to reach for that thing and it's out of reach and you get to see, someone doesn't even care. They're keeping it away from me, And we think of our emotions. Many emotions can be toxic emotions. So when someone's feeling shame, we don't need someone to hide their shame because it's triggering for us and to bury it and to dilute it with the substances to get a fix, to fix it, right? Into the matter, it's often drink, food, alcohol, sex. It's usually something substantial, substance. It delays it, which can sometimes give a needed pull or push to pause or to slow down and to feel, to be in it, right? So rather that gap between where they want to get to, and then they're sort of even getting more stuck because they're ashamed of being ashamed, and then they try to fix it with something physical. So when we become a teacher, we have to give up the rewards of our teachings to our students. The world to come is not being better for me alone, but for them too. The Torah actually, which is the light of the world, is not separate from us. And the world and all of it and nature and God, it's all one. The body of ourself is we have a Torah, we have the body, we have the one who would let someone suffer, we have the one who gets ashamed of being ashamed. That's the idea, the compartmentalizing, that the body is what to give itself by the designer. And we know that the Alter Rebbe and the Maggid, who started Chassidus after the Baal Shem Tov, they were the next ones. Chabad Chassidus, specifically with Alter Rebbe. The private physician, Dr. Gardia of Austria, learned from a wealthy man. The Maggid told him that the doctor is accompanied, a doctor, by a healing angel. And the greater the doctor, the more the angel's healing power can affect the effects. And from Rabbi Nachman, I believe, there's a story. There was the king of sadness. He couldn't make a happy person run out of creativity and willingness to adapt to new ways of meeting his needs and finding and receiving happiness. Even though a good rich meal was the example, the guy kept finding a way to have a meal. One day the king said, I made a law that no one could do this, and this is how the guy made his money, so he stopped. He found another way. Then he made a law, you can't do this, and everything. He kept making a law that you couldn't do it because the guy didn't know this is the king, and it was the king of sadness dressing up as a regular person. So even though a good rich meal was what this man wanted, every day it made him happy, the guy managed to do it every time. And even when he came to the king, the king said, I want you to judge. He had traded in his sword. He would join the army. He traded in his sword for the metal and he had a wooden sword. And the king said, I'm gonna expose him. He said, we're gonna get this soldier. They said, why him? He's just regular. He said, no, we'll get a regular soldier. Choose him at random. Of course, it wasn't random. And he comes in. They say, okay, this guy, did such and such, you have to execute him. And he said, and he knew, I don't want to execute this person. Also, I have a wooden sword. I won't be able to execute him. And also, this guy was innocent for some reason. That was the side of the story. So how did this adaptive man, because of his happiness, how did he find a way? He said, I hold my sword up, and if this man is innocent, my sword will turn to wood, and I will not be able to execute him because they didn't know if he's innocent. A few people were doubting this man that he was really guilty. He put the sword to the guy's neck and it was wood. So he even found a way from his happiness, a clever way to win over. And the king of sadness was converted over to recognize that happiness is the way. So this is, as a lesson, as an example, to use possible solutions, newness, options for living in an expanding universe, always something positive approach. We have to all make new connections, and this is like a space age, right? We're all having illuminance and immanence, not collision, but in unity of realms. So for example, people are expanding, the whole universe is expanding, there's more space, we're filling up the space with light, and we're connecting even with the internet, all the space between. We can experience this internally too. We have an inner network, an internal internet. And as a way to prepare for the pattern, instead of inappropriate, or unnecessary resistance. For example, like, no, it's not going to work out, or the king of sadness. We don't want to follow the king of sadness. We want to be able to find happiness. This is from the story and the lesson. And finally, I'll end with, it takes time to cure. They say there's 7-day cycles of creation sometimes, plus there's 4 different weeks. So just looking at the earth, right, we have 4 seasons over the year, and looking at the month, the woman has 4 different seasons per month. We have, ovulation, shedding of the uterus. We have then a week of menstruation, then a week of where it's starting to move up, back. Everything is becoming replenished. So we could see it's summer, winter, fall, and spring, and it's like a matter of shifting via time. So how much of our time are we willing to share with others is part of the life of all. So the earth sharing her fruits and vegetables from her plants, and trees and resources for our homes and for our fuel. So I'm going to stop here, and may we all be in the best way of service that and use the ability to compartmentalize for good. The best way of service for the whole. One for all and all for one.